So, as many of you know, Eric just launched a Kickstarter campaign today for a new book about being an entrepreneurial manager. It's a guide for managers. And somebody just asked, what are the themes you want to explore in your new book?
Sure. So, many of you have been following this on Twitter all day, but in case anybody has somehow missed it and has still managed to be at this party, I'm not actually sure who that would be. But when you're promoting something, you launch something, you're supposed to talk about it constantly, so that's what I will attempt to do. So I will write a new book. Its code name is The Startup Way. It will come out in a couple of years. It will be published by Crown, who also published the Lean Startup. And that book, I think now we have a chance, as kind of a Lean Startup community, as a movement, to make a pitch to the broader, world out there that there's a new kind of company to be built. But if you look at the companies, even the 5-year-old hot startups and the 100-year-old, GEs of the world, they're all built to this common 20th century blueprint that is, functional silos and really like annual appropriations and decision making that's basically glacial. Even if you have individual teams within those companies that are doing agile or customer development or design thinking and are very iterative, the company as a whole, its structure is it's basically waterfall as a corporate structure. So I think we have an opportunity to say, look, a truly modern company will be one that was built from the ground up to grow through continuous innovation and not just efficiency exploitation. So it might be weird to be like, wait a second, you're gonna write this book, it's gonna come out several years from now, you're gonna lock yourself in a cave and pound away at the keyboard and then come out with this masterpiece and launch it to the world. That doesn't sound very lean. And it's not. I mean, it drives me crazy that that's even considered a normal way to write a book. Plus, the question that no one ever asked me, but I wish that they would, I wish every business author got asked this question, is like, how do you really know that the ideas in the book work? I understand that you were there and you used them yourself, but how do I know if I read your book, interpret what you say, use it myself, how do I know that's actually going to be effective at doing the thing you said? And most of the time the answer is well, hey, you bought the book, so my responsibility is over. Thanks for the $26, good luck. So I was really been looking for how do you do a minimum viable product, how do you do an MVP, how do you experiment with a book? And that's where the idea of the Kickstarter campaign came up. This is something that didn't exist really when I was writing Lean Startup. Crowdfunding was not as big a thing as it is now, and I thought, why not take a lot of the material that I already have that I use with my the companies that I work with, startups and enterprise alike, case studies and workshops and the curriculum I teach. I'll turn that into an experiment. So it's called the Leader's Guide. You can get it on Kickstarter as of this morning. It's going to be a one-print run, one-time only experiment. By contract, it cannot be sold in bookstores. It's only going to be available in the Kickstarter campaign. It will never be available again. And it's an experiment to see what happens when we take some of these ideas and put them out into the world, see what happens when you use them. And it includes an online community so we can kind of share stories with each other, and that will be a big part of the research process that will lead to the new book, which eventually will come out. And I'm excited because it means when the new book comes out, we can actually tell people, not only do we think this works, and we hope it works, but we have the evidence to say, when people actually take these ideas on their own and apply them, here's what happens. So that is the campaign. You can back it. Of course, we are very grateful to, I think we've had something like 1,000 backers already. It's been a very, very exciting day. And everybody who bought tickets for this event on Eventbrite, who was like, well, I'll put the tickets for $99, you'll notice that that's also what it costs to get the ticket to this on Kickstarter. So anybody who did that is also getting the Leader's Guide included in your ticket. We just couldn't tell you that at the time. So for your leap of faith, believing in us enough to come to the party, pay for it, everyone you will get to. So thank you. Okay, promotion mode off.
Promotion mode off, definitely. So, given that your book is about leadership as a guide for leaders, how do you think an entrepreneurial leader differs from a more traditional leader? I mean, there's so many management guys out there. How is this different? Why should we love it?
Yeah, right, exactly. Not that I'm promoting a book or anything, but I've heard this is a great book and I'll answer this question.
No, it's not about the book. It's really what makes
what is the concept? No, I think that's right. It's Scott Cook, who was the founder of Intuit, he calls the difference between playing Caesar is like the old style management, which is somebody brings you an idea, and you as the big boss, the manager, the leader, you're supposed to project confidence. You're supposed to know what you're talking about, and you're supposed to tell people that's either a good idea or a bad idea. And your skill as a leader is about how well can you make those calls, under pressure, and hit the numbers and make it happen. But basically, it's all about you and what you are able to do. And I think that's a really it's an old school way of thinking about leadership, especially because as our companies and our kind of global supply chains get more complicated and larger, the distance between the leader and the actual reality and the data that they're trying to act against is growing further and further. So as you become a more and more senior leader, you have this problem where like somebody on the front line finds out about something, it gets passed up the chain of command to you. You say thumbs up to doing something about it or whatever you do, and then the instructions kind of filter back down, and then more data comes back up. Things can go pretty awry when there's this big lag between you and the thing that you're trying to do. So the kind of more modern paradigm of leadership is that leaders' job is to give their employees and everybody on their team the platforms for experimentation. It's our job as leaders to actually build out the tools and own them, to allow employees to quickly and easily discover the truth for themselves. So I gotta say, like when I was a leader, in startups, the difference between someone comes to you with an idea that's like, hey, I think we should add this feature, or we should go into this new market or whatever, and I really think that you, leader, should do something about that. Anyway, my job is done. I've given you the suggestion, and I'm box checked, back to my job. The difference between that and someone who comes in and said, actually, I've already run the experiment, and here's the preliminary data about the MVP that we did. In the last 10 days, that cost like $3,000, and it's inexpensive, quick, and cheap. And the early indication is that there's something here. It's a much better and much easier decision. You say, well, we have the facts on our side. Let's go explore that more. So it's about kind of how do you give people those tools, and how do you build structures that allow people to make decisions in that more, empirical, meritocratic way.
So how do you think larger companies, especially, or medium to large companies, should be structured to be more entrepreneurial? Should there be chief innovation officers? Should there be entrepreneurship departments?
Yeah, I think of entrepreneurship as what I call the missing function in most companies. Even startups. I'm amazed how many startups, the entrepreneur refers to the founder. Now, when you're 10 people, that's fine. When you're 50 people, it's okay. But if you're 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people, and there's one entrepreneur in your organization, you're in trouble. Because no matter how you're the greatest entrepreneur of all time, how many good ideas can you have per day? And how many things in the company can you really personally be involved in and keep track of? So all of a sudden you have people who work for you, who have a title that's not entrepreneur, it's like product manager or some god-awful thing like that. And some of the people who have that title, their job is to take the brilliant thing that you did before and make it 10% better every day. So they're just cranking out. And when if you have someone who works for you, they're really fun to work with, because they come into your office and say, boss, every quarter we need to improve this critical metric by 3%, and that will help our overall margins by what? And if they say that's going to happen, it's going to happen. I mean, it might be 2.9%, not 3%. But when they say something's going to happen, it's going to be in the jargon literature of corporate management stuff. It's called the say-do ratio. How often when they say something is going to happen, does it actually come to pass? And it's basically all the time. Those people are really fun to work with. And then there's this other person who also has a card that says product manager, but their job is to bring you into a completely new business that has nothing to do with what you're doing today. And think about people dealing with consumerization of enterprise IT. So you're an enterprise IT company, and everybody's sales process, quarterly targets, everything's great. And you have this one manager over here who's trying to, you sell big corporate, big iron IT contracts for $1 million. And this person over here is we should give our product away for free. But then it'll grow virally, and then it's just it's kind of complicated, Dropbox type story. And when that person comes to your office, boss, I'm pretty sure that we can make $100 million a year with this new line of business. And you're awesome, when's that going to happen? And you're sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. So what's going to happen next quarter? It's well, and they kind of realize that, oh, I better make something up right now. Oh, we're going to have 100,000 people use our product for sure. And you're great. They come back to you, and you're so, plus or minus 10%, right? And they're yes, when I said 100,000, what I meant was 100. And you're 100 what units? And you're 100 individual people. And it's you've this kind of person drives you crazy. Is there any of you actually have this experience? People like that? You're probably more likely to be the person giving these reports, I'm guessing, if you come to this event. It's really frustrating, but the corporate system is not designed to have those people function. So what should the structure be? Let's just admit that entrepreneur is a job function. It should be a job title. There should be a career path for those people, separate accountability metrics, and a promotion path. And I was so skeptical that it was real. I said, well, I can't write about this in my book unless I see it with my own eyes. And I schlepped out to DC to meet with them, and I was asking them all kinds of trick questions about I was oh, is this really safe to release this thing when you haven't done, certification, and I was show me your requirements document. I was trying to trick them into am I being sold a bill of goods here? And they're patiently lecturing me about how important it is to do things agile and important to listen to customers. A lot of them didn't know who I was. And I was okay, this is this is for real. Like it's happening now. It's exploding. It's really great. And if there's anyone who feels like they'd like to take a year and serve their country doing this kind of work, look up the United States Digital Service they're hiring.
So we have time for just a couple more questions. One that a lot of us face is about multitasking. You said that multitasking just doesn't work. It's not conducive to innovation, but in many of our companies, our bosses pressure us to do that. So what advice can you give folks here?
Well, there's two things. First of all, I do multitasking all the time. Like, it's a very natural human thing to think that you're better at multitasking than you really are. As being human, that's actually not so bad. If you're working you're a novelist, you're working on 2 different books, you'd be better off running 1 book at a time. But if you really have to do 2 at once, that's okay. Because at least you're multitasking between 2 similar things. And so it's 2 similar kinds of work and you can give attention to both. The problem with innovation that's uniquely bad in most companies is you're saying to someone, I need you to multitask between this crazy, wacky project that will probably get you fired and this safe, really relatively easy project that will probably get you promoted. And could you please give them each equal time? No human being is capable of doing that. It's really, really, really hard. You tend to gravitate towards the thing that you think is going to have the best outcome, the thing that's most likely to be successful for you. And so it's almost a form of cruel and unusual punishment, I think, to ask people to multitasking. I think the reason that leaders want to have multitasking is it gives them the illusion of more flexibility in scheduling and allocation. So very common thing is, oh, it's a bad quarter, we need to reduce budgets by 10%. So we have all these different projects that are all in various states of multitasking. It's pretty easy to be like, we have 15 people on this thing 10% of the time. Like, a 10% reduction is easy. If I have 3 people working on something full time, I need to cut 10%. It's like, well, which limb am I supposed to remove? It's more difficult. But the simple solution to this that I can't believe is not more common is just to say, look, when you have to make a 10% reduction, you're making it at the portfolio level. So just cancel 10% of your projects. Don't cut 10% of everybody's budget. And when you do that, then you have the real conversation about what's really going on, which is that a lot of projects that are nominally being worked on in companies are there to pad the schedule and create buffer and actually are not important at all. So we start to be like, no, I'm going to put a bullet through projects, they're going to die. Then you discover the politics and the nonsense about the way things are allocated. So a lot of this is just artifact. And it's funny, there's one more thing about that. I work with multinational companies that work across regions, sectors, a company like GE, they're in practically every kind of business, they're all regulated businesses, there are hundreds of thousands of employees. What is remarkable to me is how consistent some of these behaviors are. It wouldn't bother me so much if some divisions use full-time teams and some did part-time teams, right? You're well, it's a matter of individual manager's choice. But across the whole world, hundreds of thousands of employees, everybody does it the same way. That's a remarkable feat of corporate coordination. And I remember saying to someone, I was show me the corporate manual where it says to do this. There must be a rule somewhere that you have to have part-time committees to get anything done. And there's no rule. It's not officially part of the muffin. It's a side effect of our unintended consequence of the way that other things are happening. So if you're willing to tackle that at the root cause level, you can say, look, can we take part of this division, part of this team, part of this budget, and we don't have to change everything all at once, but can we try as an experiment, take 10% of our budget and allocate it this new and different way and see the results? That's what I'm always pushing for. It's not don't boil the ocean, but can we just try it? It's the green eggs and ham strategy. Try it, you probably will like it. And when people see how much more productive a startup team is compared to a committee, that becomes the conversation to have with a leader. It's listen, wouldn't you like to get 10 times more work done than you get done today with the same resources? And all you have to do is make a few kind of uncomfortable political choices, but the results, they're pretty exciting.
And finally, do you wish you had used a different name than Lean Startup to resonate more broadly? And did you A/B test the name when you first?
Yeah, if you go back to the very original blog post, it's still on my blog, you can look it up, where I introduced the concept of Lean Startup. It's very short post. I did not think this was going to be a thing that would take over my life for the next 5 years. I was just hey, I'm thinking about this combination of these trends, and I'm pretty sure it should be called Lean Startup, but maybe Agile Startup, or I threw out some other kind of ideas, and Lean Startup is the one that stuck. Not a month goes by that someone doesn't tell me I chose the wrong word. And I'm I give everyone the same answer. It's great, you tell me what it should be, and we'll switch to yours. No problem. If someone has a better name for what this should be called, I'm all ears, let's do it. But I haven't found one yet. The thing I like about Lean Startup, even though it has problems, is that it really points to the intellectual foundation of lean manufacturing as the base this is built off of. You have to be very willfully ignorant to not discover that. If you like Google Lean Startup for 5 seconds. And what's cool about that, it's actually like what I hoped would happen, but I wasn't sure if this would really happen, is that as we start to go into larger organizations, there's a huge number of people out there that have a proficiency in something like lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, these kind of earlier generation corporate changes. We take it so for granted that, of course, we live in a massive supply chain where everything's super efficient and lean manufacturing rules the day, and we take so for granted that accomplishment. It's hard for us to remember. There was a time when lean manufacturing was very controversial. In fact, and there are still some places where it's quite controversial. So there are allies for us inside enterprises and policymakers. There's all these people that have something in common with us, a set of vocabulary, a set of concepts, and I find it really helpful when I work with companies that have that legacy or that that kind of capability in immigration with the visa application process at the FDA. All over the government. Very, very cool stuff. So not only and I mentioned it briefly in the book. I don't know if people remember this, like a very brief little vignette about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is really built using these principles from the start. And the stuff we're talking about. Like by weight, that stuff actually occupies the majority of the book: how to scale, how to build teams, how and what to measure. But though I don't get to ask those questions very often about that stuff, because people get so excited about the potential of the bumper sticker part, they don't always study the stuff that comes after. And to me, that's the number one big misconception. And especially as we start to talk about having a portfolio of startups, like in an established company or in a high-growth startup, that's when those things become really important. When it's all well and good to do an MVP and to build, measure, learn, and iterate, that's great. But what do you do? Like, entrepreneurs have this one overriding, very bad habit, which is that we love to spend other people's money. Am I right? We love it. And as soon as you do that, the day you spend something, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about the CFO's money, the VC's money, or your spouse's money, it's your life savings, somebody wants to know, hey, all that money you spent, what happened? What did I get for that? What's the ROI? How did it turn out? And if you can't answer that question in a satisfactory way, that's where a lot of entrepreneurial problems come from. And believe me, at that point, you can't be like, oh, but we learned so much. Set our life savings on fire, but it was a great learning experience, and we're so close to, that's the time you want to have mastered innovation accounting. So please do be careful with that.
So there's a question that a lot of you are interested in about A/B testing. So at companies like Netflix, A/B testing is used extensively, and how is it being used in lean startups?
Yeah.
And MVPs?
I've been talking to for a lot of people at South by are relatively young. I have a number of students who have come up to me, and people who graduated from college recently, and it's been kind of blowing my mind that they have questions about things like A/B testing, but they don't realize that just even 10 years ago, the idea that you would apply something like A/B testing to product, and it would have anything to do with engineering, was so controversial. Many people that I suggested it to got screaming mad at me about it. It wasn't they were like, that's a bad idea, but that's a ludicrously bad idea that shows you're unfit to be an engineer. That's how bad of an idea it was considered. When I started doing A/B testing, at the company I started in 2004, where Tim and I worked, there were no A/B testing frameworks in any language that we used. They didn't not that they weren't good, or oh, I really would have preferred this one or that one, but someone's waving at you. You were someone who was there. I'm wondering. There wasn't. They didn't exist. It was not considered a thing to do. So, on the one hand, I'm thrilled that A/B testing is now considered just a normal, every startup has it, everybody does it, every analytics package has it. It's considered obvious that you should do that. Of course, the A/B testing that people do in big companies tends to be about micro optimization of individual features or components, where you have a large sample size and you're looking for the signal and the noise. When people are doing an MVP in a startup, whenever people start arguing about sample size, I know they've really gone off the rails. And I'll give you an example just from my own, just some people here are here who were there when this happened, to tell you the story. So imagine you're the CTO of a startup. You've been working really hard on this product. And you're like, okay, gotta talk to customers, that's important. So you have a customer come in for a usability test. They sit down and say, okay, please use my product. My customer's like, no thanks. They're like, I'm sorry, what do you mean? They're like, I'd rather not use this product. I don't think you understand how this works. This usability test, we're paying you to be here, so you kind of have to do it. That's the idea. And they're like, no, you can keep your money. I would rather not be. I'd rather pay you to get out of this usability test than use your. That's how bad your product is. Now you're the CTO. What do you say? Anyone ever been in this situation? where'd you find this bozo? How'd you like? You turn to the person who ran the usability study. You're like, God, where did you find this? The one customer on earth who can't be paid. Like, get this guy out of here. You're fired. Give me a new customer. So throw it back. Give me another. Second one comes in. Second time happens. You're like, wow, you have the worst luck. 2 in a row. That's just unbelievable. What are the odds? Third customer in a row happens. I'm not making this up. It really happens to me. What do you say? Anyone ever done this? It's not a statistically significant sample. It's only 3 customers. But that's ridiculous. It's actually quite significant. What are the odds that you happen to find the only 3 people? Like, sample size is related to the intensity of the signal itself. So the critical thing about A/B testing in startups, and especially with MVPs, is we got to be looking for the big picture signals. Which means if you're not sure if the test is positive, it's not positive. Like the tests we're looking for are the ones that are glaringly obvious that you're on the right track, and if you're not sure, you're wrong. Of course, we don't want to believe that, so we come up with all kinds of nonsense reasons. But I think that's kind of the biggest thing still for people to understand what they do.
Great. There's another question that I was very interested in. I was at a panel earlier this week about visas, and probably the most boring department of government. And but they were talking about lean government, lean visas, and people in the audience laughed. So how are lean principles being applied to government and civic engagement?
Anyone from USDS here? Okay. Anyone, you got a USDS people? We're always trying to recruit for USDS. I just want to know if there's someone they can talk to. Okay, I guess I can't give the lights. I have no idea if they are or not. The first time someone pitched me the idea that it would be lean government, meaning lean startup in government, like I was like, that's a contradiction in terms. That's ridiculous, and I was very dismissive of it. But I have come around to this idea, not because I had the brilliant idea that it should happen, but because people have actually started to do it. The size and scale of federal government is like hard for people to wrap their minds around, but within it, just think about how it's so big. It's not one big monolithic thing. There's like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of individual projects being done, and whenever those projects are being done, you can choose. Do you want to do them waterfall style or not? The one silver lining of the healthcare.gov debacle is giving us an easy, quick, way to convince people not to do waterfall. So like I often will meet with folks, I can go around and do this in the private sector too. People are like, oh, here's my plan for my 3-year IT project, I'm gonna do this thing. And I'm like, oh great, the healthcare.gov plan. Sweet. And people get pretty mad. They're like, how can you accuse me of such a how dare you? I'm like, well, let me draw a little chart. The elements of the plan A, here's what healthcare.gov did and here's what you're doing. And look, it's the same. Can we talk about a different way? And in the government, it used to be considered safer, less risky, more managed and controlled to do things waterfall, but now we have this opportunity to say, actually, waterfall is riskier than doing something in an iterative fashion because you really don't know until the last minute if it's going to work. So that opportunity has kind of opened up for some very far-sighted people, starting with Anish Chopra and Todd Park, who were the first 2 chief technology officers of the United States. The original program was called Entrepreneurs in Residence in government, and there was something that's called the Presidential Innovation Fellows, and just recently they have built this thing called the United States Digital Service, which is basically lean startup teams of technologists being moved into agencies to work on projects, and there's actually really organized to do that as just a normal part of their operations. Here's the thing, if you're gonna have growth that's powered by startups, just doing it one time is not going to cut it. This needs to be a routine practice that whenever you have a good idea, you're like, oh, let's put a startup on it. That's like the old Amazon 2-pizza team idea, which is just, you have these small teams, it's a corporate function, it's in your toolbox, you do it all the time.
So there are a bunch of questions on the board about how to incentivize entrepreneurship within a company, whether, typically this applies to larger companies, medium to large companies, in which entrepreneurship is, leaders talk about innovation, but they don't necessarily put their money where their mouths are. So what sort of incentives would you recommend that employees ask for? And also as part of performance management, should entrepreneurship be something that's reviewed? Yeah,
I mean, this is a very big topic. And see, one of my favorite things about the Leaders Guide, and the fact that we're getting to do this project, not to promote it or anything, but it's like, there's so much detail to how, how should a performance review happen in this context? What should the performance review matrix look like? What needs to be added and subtracted? And it's great to be oh, I don't have to answer this question in a 4-hour dissertation. Everyone get this in print. That would be great. So, because the reason I say that is that do not try this at home unless you understand kind of how it works in some detail. Like, there's nothing to like mess around with. You gotta be careful. The details matter a lot. And what I see kind of innovators, the mistake I see a lot is that in order to get the project going and like to get the opportunity to do the innovation, they're willing to accept all kinds of compromises. It's like, well, okay, I know that making a commitment to a specific vanity metric in the future is a bad idea, but that's what was required to get finance on board, right? I'm talking about promising a specific ROI for my project. Like, that's probably going to be the kiss of death, but not for a little while, so I bought myself some time. That's pretty good. And a lot of this is about, so how, like in detail, how do we get people in those different functions? How can we offer them something that's still like rigorous enough for their use and also can still get our project going? So performance management is a huge one. The short kind of bumper sticker answer is that you want to give the people who are doing entrepreneurial work a feeling of ownership over the work that they do. Like, that's something that people really crave. Silicon Valley, we love to do that with equity ownership and have people have a financial stake in the outcome, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be about recognition, it can be about autonomy, being able to make their own decisions about what gets done. And something I didn't get to talk about this morning that I think is really cool is people think that autonomy is a good thing. And it's like, people are like, I want my team to be autonomous, and they kind of have this view that that's like free ice cream. It's like, who wouldn't want it? Like, it's like my choice between dependence and independence. Like, I always choose independence. But then the next thing they do is they're like, okay, but I'm gonna do an experiment. I want my autonomous team. We're gonna put this thing out there, and then someone will say, but hold on, what if customers are confused? We're gonna have this new feature. What if it's not good? What if they call customer support? And the team's like, well, they'll call customer support. What's the big deal? It's like, that's not autonomy. But that's borrowing customer service resources and making them be. If their customers are calling anybody, they're calling you. If there's a support number on the page, like, that's your cell phone. You have to get called. Like, you have to be self-sufficient, and that means being resourceful about all the things that have to happen for the startup to be successful. And that's so critical, because if you're borrowing resources for other people in the company, first of all, it's not fair. It's deeply, deeply unfair. Like, why do middle managers kill startups? It's because they're like, it's for this kind of unfair behavior. They are being held accountable. Their jobs depend on making the quarter. And now you're saying, well, in addition to making the quarter, also help me with this wacky other thing that you don't care about? Like, that's not fair. That causes, bad immune reactions. You really don't want to do that. But also, if you're outsourcing responsibility for those things, you're missing a critical opportunity to learn what's really going on. And so many of the people I know that work in established companies, and even people who work in startups, like the people that join a startup in year 3 when it's already a couple hundred people, like a lot of them join into a corporate function. They actually don't know what the other functions do or how they work. So they don't really understand the business at all. They just know their little slice of it, and that's really dangerous too.
So I'm really interested, your book came out in 2011, correct? And so that's in a number of years. There was a great question there. What do you think is the most misunderstood part of your first book?
Oh, yeah.
The fact that everybody says pivot for everything?
Pivot, just do it, yeah. Well, one critical thing is we have a lot better jokes and memes out there on the internet than we did when the book came out. That helps a lot. If you haven't seen the cartoon on YouTube of the drug dealer being told by a Lean Startup guru that he needs to iterate his business, strongly recommended. Not suitable for work, but very entertaining. So here's the thing: the parts of the Lean Startup that fit well on a bumper sticker are very famous. So people want, like, what fits on a bumper sticker? Minimum viable product, easy. Pivot, easy. A/B testing, continuous deployment. Tim Fitz is here, who coined the term continuous deployment. So if you're interested in continuous deployment, just talk to Tim. That stuff people get really excited about, and they ask me about. Now, if you took the Lean Startup and you measured it by weight, like the physical pages, how much time is spent talking about those concepts versus the more, not very bumper sticker